So today's video, I wanted to title something like Orchestrated Morons, or Orchestrated Harassment, or Polymath Drama or Disaster. And the reason is I remembered a couple instances of people doing very odd, bizarre things leading up to January of 2011, when someone set me up to believe that I'd be murdered in my apartment. And since then I've been harassed. It was really bad for quite a few years. It slowed down because I moved to Florida in 2018. Every once in a while things would crop up and it's like, how do they do it? Like, what is it? Also the pandemic sort of thinned things out. But what I wanted to talk about were a couple of simple things. I'm wondering why it started, but I mean, technically I could go back to like 1986. Like when I was a kid, my parents had been divorced since I was a toddler, an infant toddler. So I was born in 1970, the end of 1970, December. In 72, my parents wound up divorced. And in 73, my dad remarried someone who lived up the street and was also married and had 2 kids of her own through that marriage. But they decided they liked each other better or whatever, unless it was orchestrated by other people. But we'll get into that later. It sounds, some people might poo-poo the idea, but we'll get into this later because it's snowballed, the orchestrated activity. It could be done by people who are used to stealing money from other families, and that would be like the end game. How can we keep pushing away the natural-born children so that we wind up with the most in the end, and the natural-born children look like they're the problem because they didn't want to hang out with everyone. But anyway, point being, I guess this is after I got a car. I worked, the last 2 years of high school, I worked half a day and I went to high school half a day. It was a weird program, and for some reason I wound up in the working, like hard-working category, while everybody else was having parties, doing scrimmage after school, So anyway, I worked for a credit card bank, but at some point I needed to get a car because carpooling wasn't always an option, and sometimes my mom would actually take time off of work to drive me to the workplace. Anyway, point being, every other weekend I would drive to my dad's until I went off to college. Then we had a different schedule. Like, I didn't do the same thing, but through the age of 18, I would drive up to my dad's on a Friday night, and Sunday night I would go back home to my mom. So my entire childhood was like this. Usually my dad picked me up and dropped me back off on the every other weekend, bi-weekly situation. So I drive over, and as I pulled up to my dad's house, dad and stepfamily's house, which was 216 Seneca Drive, Newark, Delaware. It's kind of on the cusp of Newark. I think they still call it Newark. It's not really downtown Newark, but it's near the Christiana Mall and all that. And I drive up and my heart sank, my stomach. I was just like, because my stepbrother, who would have been like 20 or 21 at the time, was playing catch with my dad in the yard. So it wasn't like he was a kid playing catch. That would have hurt me too, but he was older. He never left. He stayed in the house even after my dad and stepmom retired, and somehow he wound up staying there until he was ready to get his own house. Everybody else wound up in apartments and having to pay rent and stuff like that. But anyway, what a man, what a man, what a mighty young man. But anyway, I think he orchestrated this activity knowing full well that I would feel a lot of pain, because while I grew up, the stepfamily they actually made a valiant effort to make my sister and I feel like losers. And they always had our dad, and they would rub it in our faces. It's hard to explain. People have certain personalities, and it was rubbed in. So anyway, so that hurt me, but at the time I thought it was odd. I'm like, that's interesting. They're out here for the first time ever in all these years playing catch in the yard. They didn't really do that. Something was off. It seemed a little bit artificial, but I knew that I was hurt, but I was used to being hurt. So I grew up, you know, a very sad person because I was hurt all the time because other people had my dad, and it was rubbed in my face and my sister's face. Make a right. So anyway, so, you know, it was sort of locked in my brain, and I kind of, you know, you go through life and you don't always remember everything. And then later, leading up to 2011, when I was made to believe I'd be murdered in my apartment, many years later, you know, we're talking 1986 compared to 2011, 86, 87 compared to 2011. And I lived above Dirty Frank's in Pineview Apartments. Back then they belonged to Pearl Properties. Now they belong to Renzi Properties, I think, unless they've sold them in like the past year and a half or something. And I had a lot of jobs. So I had freelance contract writing. I had like 3 different gigs going on at one time. And what I would do to just make sure I had money coming in is I would also take care of people's cats and dogs. But it was more on the side. It wasn't full-time. It was never supposed to be full-time, but it sort of wound up that way because of what Philadelphia did. Also, oddly, it's a way to meet people in the city and sort of be kept busy while earning money. And if you're a single person, you know, it's harder to pay your bills than if you live with someone who shares resources with you, whether a spouse, partner, or just a roommate, you know what I mean? And it's harder for single women to find roommates because you're putting yourself in jeopardy. It's harder. So anyway, especially in a big city. So flash forward to 2009-10, and word was out there that I took care of people's cats and dogs. And someone who lived like across the street kind of from Giovanni's Room bookstore, now it's AIDS Thrift, and near Pine Pizza, in that vicinity. And this would be considered the neighborhood. She's like, oh, Sharon, I heard you were, yeah, could you take care of my cats by any chance? I was like, sure, no problem. But she began to act like it was a major coup, like, oh, I have the Sharon Cole, as if I were a star, as if it were a win to take care of my cats for 2 days while I'm away, you know, in another part of the state or whatever. So I was like, that's odd. She's acting as if it were a big, like it was a major accomplishment or achievement. It was a little off again. I was like, whatever, you know. So, you know, we set up a date for me to get the keys and for her to give instruction and stuff like that. So I go over there, she's showing me like the cat bowls and, you know, all that. And just when she would have wrapped it up and given me the keys, someone knocked on the door. And granted, this is the neighborhood, so, and I believe she still identifies as a lesbian. But anyway, someone knocked on the door, someone named Kelly, a friend of hers, well, I guess a girlfriend of hers. And Kelly came in and like immediately they started smooching on the couch. Now, these people would have been about 30 years old. It's not like they're in high school or even early college or something. And I'm standing there like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And she didn't seem the type. Like this person did not seem the type to do something this weird. And even smooching is pushing it for this person. Like it just didn't seem within her. Oh look, there's Sharon's bank. I hope it's mine someday.